This week, Allan is away at a ZFS conference, so it seems kind of fitting that we have a great interview with Adam Leventhal, where we're going to discuss all kinds of ZFS and DTrace history. That plus the latest news and some items we just couldn't get to last week. So stay tuned. BSD Now is coming your way right now. BSD Now, episode 112, Tracing the Source, recorded October 21st, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Allan Jude.
We're glad to have you guys with us this week. So actually, we're recording this a little bit early again because, yet again, Allan's out of town. Man, you're a busy guy. You're traveling a lot now. Allan's actually out at the Open ZFS conference out in the Bay Area right now. So you heard us talk about that last week. So if you were able to make that, great. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll have some good information from Allan when he gets back the following week. We'll love to hear your wrap-up on that, Allan. And take some pictures, give us some other stuff so we have some tidbits to show people as well. That'd be kind of cool. But believe it or not, we actually have a pretty full episode for this week, too, even though this is a pre-recorded one. Usually we don't have enough news going into the future. But gosh, we've just had a lot the last couple of weeks. So we've saved some for this week's episode as well. So you're going to get pretty much a full episode here. So anyway, we will get right into it. And first up, we're going to be leading off with some pfSense news. It looks like pfSense 2.3, the first alpha snapshots are now available. So that's pretty exciting. We have a link to where you can grab that off their blog here. But we also have a list of some of the new features and changes, which sounds like this is not a small release here. First of all, the entire front end has been rewritten. So yeah, that's big and noteworthy in and of itself. But in addition,
the Bootstrap framework and
it's going to be really cool. But it looks like they've also upgraded the base OS to FreeBSD 10 stable. So that means new drivers, new stuff, new goodness. That's very cool.
And that means they'll have that PF in Zen fix very shortly.
That's right. That's right. Also, they've removed the PPTP server component, which I guess we don't need that anymore. So that's been nuked.
People shouldn't have been using that for a long time.
That's right.
The only compelling feature it had was that the client was built into Windows XP. And all newer versions of Windows have had, L2TP and so on built in. So
for a long time, So also, PBIs have been replaced in favor of PKG, like we have done elsewhere on FreeNAS and whatnot. And also, it looks like PHP has been upgraded to version 5.6. So definitely a bunch of new stuff under the hood here as well. And we have links if you'd like to go see some of the other details as well. That's all in the show notes here.
Yeah, they say they've tested this in-house, but we have zero doubt that more issues will be found, especially in the infrequently used features. And therefore, they advise that you do not use this in production systems yet. This is an alpha. It's meant for testing and poking at and previewing and helping them find the bugs, but they really don't want you to be switching.
So you can try it at home, but don't switch your office over to it yet. Basically, that's what they're saying.
Because weird things might happen.
That's right. Okay. Also, BSD Magazine, which is a magazine produced out in Poland, has come out with their new issue. It's a free download, so they don't charge you for this one if you'd like to go read that. But looks like their October 2015 issue is out, and we have a lot of articles in this one. What do you know? The first one here is look at what's new in PCBSD 10.2, written by me. We have the basis of the Lumina desktop environment, which is written by my brother Ken Moore. We have a secure web server on FreeBSD with Hiawatha by David Carlier. Defeating CryptoLocker attacks with ZFS, Michael Dexter. That sounds interesting. And emerging technology has been increasingly been a force for both good and evil by Rob Somerville. And then we have a couple of interviews here. It looks like Drew Levine, Luca Fiera, and Alexander Rablako. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. But definitely a packed episode here. So you'll want to go ahead and download that. And I think it's just PDF. So get it on your tablet or smartphone. Or
PDF or EPUB.
Okay, great. So go ahead and check that out. That'll give you some more reading to do going into the weekend. Yeah, maybe it doesn't help you with your morning commute like we do. But hey, when you get bored on the weekend, you got something to read now. So, there you go. Okay, so now we have more firewall releases. So OpenSense has also done a release, it looks like. This one just landed here a few days back, but it looks like some of the notables in this one is that this time it's not a security update. There's been a major rework of their firewall rules section, so everything including rules, schedules, virtual IP NAT, and alias pages. So I'm sure they'd like people to try that out. Also, they've updated to the latest bind and squid packages. And in addition, it looks like the entire configuration system's gotten a lot of love here. There's a improved configuration management, including fixes to importing old configs and new locations for configuration history and backups of your existing configs. So definitely some new stuff to play with there.
Yeah, if you have a script backing up the config from your firewall, be careful that the configs are now in somewhere stored in a different place.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Yes.
Okay, now tell us about this one, Alan. You posted this here.
Yes.
I saw it at OpenBSD and Toyota. What's this all about?
Yes. So Chad Daugherty from the Association of Computer Machinery sent a post to OpenBSD-MISC because he said he was just flying around with the in-dash computer in his brother-in-law's Toyota Highlander and found the software information screen. And when he started flipping through it, it's a bunch of BSD copyrights with names you might recognize. So it's like ISC license number 51 from Todd Miller. Or there's next one here is there's another OpenBSD one there, Damian Millett. And then the one I recognized here was, it's partway scrolled down, but it says blah, 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 ported to OpenBSD and NetBSD with additional transforms added in December 1996 by Angelos Koumaitis, and then additional transforms features added by Neil Provost, and there's a bunch of other names that go by as you're flipping through it, and it was like, especially that last one. I actually recognized that text of license. That's the top of xforms.c from the OpenCrypto framework.
Okay.
Because I made extensive use of that file while working on the encrypted boot block stuff. So I recognized that bit of copyright right away. And so in doing a little bit of Googling about it, I managed to find the source of that. Turns out that the Toyota Highlander is running QNX, which is an operating system that I think BlackBerry, Research in Motion in Canada bought. Yeah. But they have a whole PDF here showing all the copyright notices that they've borrowed code from. And it's hundreds and hundreds of pages, but I managed to pick out a bunch of names we recognize. Robert Watson from FreeBSD, the Trusted BSD project, which was a branch of FreeBSD. Huge number of instances of the NetBSD Foundation, and then over in the details, you can see the specific people who wrote the code and then assigned the copyright to NetBSD. The NASA Ames Research Center had a copyright, but again assigned it to NetBSD. Then there was Damian Miller from OpenBSD on the OpenSSH and so on. Theo DeRat, the Sony Computer Sciences Laboratory has released a bunch of stuff under a BSD license. I'm not sure exactly what, but they have some code out there somewhere under a BSD license. Bob Beck from OpenBSD, Christos Zalos from NetBSD, Marcus Friedel from OpenBSD, Henning Brower, Network Associates has a bunch of code that's actually in FreeBSD that they released, and there was hundreds of others. And there was some copyright notices that mentioned OpenSSH specifically, but then there was a bunch of things, chunks of code released under the TCP dump license. It's like, I don't know anything other than TCP dump that uses the TCP dump license. Why is there a copy
SSH into my car?
Why does my car have TCP dump included in it?
Right? What's going on here?
So I can understand that for debugging, but it's like, is it necessary to ship it with that? I guess maybe that's how you do diagnostics on the car.
So the thing is, I don't own a Toyota Highlander, but somebody out there does. Now you need to go get OpenBSD, FreeBSD, and NetBSD, all the stickers, and put them on the back.
Yep.
Like powered by. Boom. Right?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Well, the interesting thing is that QNX is in many different cars. It seems to be one of the... Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting. The same thing you can find if you have one of those smart TVs. If you find somewhere buried in there, because of the BSD license, is the software information screen, and it has all these copyrights.
Remember when we first started the show? I think, what was it, a Samsung or a Panasonic or something? We had the TV that had FreeBSD running on it, and
Yep.
then they had like the Flash. Flash was ported over to it and everything, and I
Yep.
was like, man, how come they got Flash ported over and we didn't have a native version?
Yep. And then,
Yeah, that was years ago.
yep. And then there was, what was the other one? Oh, when we saw the list of copyright notices for the PlayStation 4. But
right.
yeah, so if you have anything that has a computer embedded in it, try to find the little software information screen and see if you can find any names you recognize in that list.
That's right. Okay, well, we're going to get to our interview here in just a moment, but before we do, it is time to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems, of course, where you can go to ixsystems.com/BSDNow. And of course, when you talk to those guys, we appreciate it if you give us the referral, like let them know that you heard it here, because they like to know like where people are listening to and what's happening out in the community. And the word is good. I guess a lot of you guys are calling IX, so good for you. Keep up the good work.
Well,
but when you talk to those guys, get back in touch with us. I'd be curious to hear what kind of stuff you bought. You know, what kind of solution did they rig up for you, and send us pictures, because we do love seeing the server porn where you got it all opened up and it's like, ooh, look at what shiny. I want one of those. That's neat. You know, it's like a new gear day.
Yeah. Well, you know,
it's very exciting.
Our interview this week has quite a bit about ZFS, and you know, if you're going to be doing anything with ZFS, you definitely want good hardware, and you want people that are building the hardware to actually know about ZFS. And the only place I know of that knows as much about ZFS as I want in my hardware, it's IX Systems.
Well, it's because they have how many committers on staff that actually do stuff for ZFS? Yeah.
It's like,
so they will tweak it and tune it and do everything you need possibly done to it.
Yeah, the ZFS code that you're using is most likely been committed to FreeBSD, even if it was just imported from Solaris, by somebody that works at IX. There are a couple other people out there that are doing some work, and you know, they were very happy to have them too. But IX does a lot, and we're very happy to have them around.
That's great. So again, guys, ixsystems.com/BSDNow, and let them know that you heard it here. And we're joined now by Adam Leventhal, who's the CTO over at Delphix, who's going to be here to talk to us about ZFS and DTrace today. So first of all, thank you so much for being on the show today, Adam. We appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. So the same thing we ask everyone who's new on the show here. So give us your kind of introduction. How did you first get introduced to and involved with Unix in general?
Let's see. So first in high school, I think the first Unix system I played with is the Next box. We had one of these Next cubes. We also had a VMS system, not Unix, but we had some antique computers over at that high school. And then I got very excited about that. Home and set up a NetBSD system, I think on an old like Mac 2SI or one of the early Power PCs. I set it up and had absolutely no idea what to do with it. I zero Unix commands. I didn't even know LS at the time, so I think I spent half an hour typing dir into it, which actually did something, and then kind of scrapped that. Then when I went to college, we had a bunch of Solaris 2.6 systems. Most of the work we did in college was on Solaris 2.6 and then on Solaris 7, and I think later on Solaris 8 in the later years of school. And so then went back to my dorm room and set up a NetBSD system on some junked Power PC computer that I had found on the street, and actually knew how to use it. So those were some of the early days of Unix exposure for me.
Okay.
Cool. So what are some of the things that you've worked on over the years in Unix?
Yeah, so I had the good fortune of interning in the Solaris kernel development team. That was in 2000. And obviously did some work around the Solaris kernel. And then joined them full-time in 2001. And I started by working on some of the diagnostic tools in Solaris. So things like MDB, or what we called the P tools, things for examining processes. So I did a bunch of work in that domain, and then kind of drifted both a little by accident, a little on purpose, into working on DTrace. I think we'll probably talk about that in a bit, but it's been great seeing that technology both start off as a tool that we used a ton internally, both to solve problems and to settle bets, and then into a tool that we've seen a bunch of customers use productively, seen ported to Mac OS X and FreeBSD, obviously, and Linux. I've seen it run on the PlayStation Vita. I've seen it run on an iPhone in the back of like a dark conference room where I wasn't supposed to be anyone. So
no cameras allowed type thing.
Exactly. So I worked on DTrace, and that was a great experience. And then so that was started with Brian Cantrell and Mike Shapiro. Then I joined the team, and then the three of us, plus Bill Moore and Eric Schrock, started a group at Sun called Fishworks. It was kind of like a startup within the company where we were building a series of appliances, starting with a storage appliance. That Oracle's now branded that the ZFS storage appliance. So that was from about 2006 to 2010. Then in that project, I worked a bunch on flash memory integration. I got to flash memory at a very fortuitous time. 2006, 2007 was right when the iPhone was coming out, when flash memory, just the price of it dropped precipitously.
Sure.
All of a sudden, all of these applications became very viable. And the first flash disks, the first SSDs I was playing with were just terrible. They were junk. They were used for, like, all of the marketing material was about how they could be stuck into helicopters and they wouldn't rattle around and lose data. And then, within 6 months of that, we started seeing enterprise SSDs. So some real fun stuff there around ZFS in particular, things like the L2ARC and Slogs or Logzilla. Then Oracle acquired Sun, obviously. I stuck around kind of long enough to figure out what was next and joined Delphix. At Delphix, we do data as a service, so solving problems around moving large data sets and making them available to a lot of different types of data users. Under the covers, even before I joined Delphix, they were using ZFS and Open Solaris, so it was a great marriage of technologies that I was familiar with and excited to keep working on, and then a big domain that I had no expertise in with regard to databases. So here I've worked as an individual contributor and then as a manager and now as CTO. Some of the technical work I've done has been unsurprisingly around performance and in particular ZFS performance.
Okay, so it definitely sounds like you've done some stuff with ZFS. Are there any particular parts of it we can blame you for?
Yeah, so let's see. So the first thing I did in ZFS was one of these hacks over a weekend that turned out to be sort of important. I discovered libz and ported it into the kernel and then plugged it into ZFS to build gzip compression. And it kind of got that working in surprisingly short order. So that was the first thing I did with ZFS, and we actually still use that same code, and I think it's largely unmodified from that weekend of hacking around. As part of the ZFS storage appliance, I took what we had built for single parity RAID and built double parity RAID, and then I later built triple parity RAID. And it's a bit more of an aside, but it turns out there's some incredibly complex math associated with RAID algorithms. I was a math CS major in college. I ostensibly understood abstract algebra. I passed the class and everything, but it turns out when you actually take your abstract algebra knowledge that could pass the class and try to apply it to writing code, it didn't really stand up for me, and it took a lot of figuring out to understand some of that subtle math. So RAID work, and then more recently, Matt Ahrens and I, who was on the show recently and was obviously one of the founding engineers behind ZFS, he and I collaborated on some work for improving the ZFS write throttle and I/O scheduler, and that was a great piece of engineering, a great collaboration, something I really enjoyed doing with Matt.
So maybe not one that you invented, but what did you say is your favorite feature of ZFS?
Well, the hubristic answer is that right throttle, man. It's one of these pieces of engineering that feels so right. There's so many wrong ways to do it, and in fact, it had been implemented in so many wrong ways. It's to the point where when we explain it to people, people say, "Of course, that's obvious," but it's only obvious after you've thrown out the 99 other kind of more obvious answers. So that one was really great, but. I think that one of my favorite features is ZFS send and receive. Yes. It's one of these, I think everyone knows about data integrity and like cloning some snapshots and some of the pieces that make ZFS obviously great, but send and receive is an awesome capability for migrating data between two different pools or systems. But the great thing is that Matt Ahrens invented that basically because he was stuck in China and wanted local access to his data, and was unhappy with rsync and all the other options. So I think the creation story of that being born of this acute pain point that he was experiencing, I love that part of it too. And if I can add a couple of ones that are more Delphix specific, we've done this piece where we're integrating stuff in the file system all the way up with work we're doing at the database level. So we've got this system where we can convert a Oracle database on, say, a Unix system like Solaris to Oracle database on a little Indian system like Linux or FreeBSD on Intel, and we note where the blocks contain swaps, swaps of 2 bytes or 4 bytes, and are able to represent that entirely different. If you check something, it would be 100% different, but represented in about 1% of the space of the original. And I again think it's just super cool that we're able to extend the file system to integrate that kind of feature.
Wow, that is
that's
nice.
pretty slick.
But yeah, I love using ZFS send receive for almost the same thing. It's like I have my server at home where I have all the source code I've been working on, and every time I go to a conference, I send it to my laptop, work on it, and then bring it home, and then send it back to my server.
Yeah.
And
as an aside, you guys probably remember this abortive attempt that Apple had for porting ZFS to Mac OS X, and they actually handed out DVDs of it at one of the WWDCs. And they had, at that same one, they announced the time capsule or time machine. I think both of those technologies. And we kind of eagerly ran up to some of the kernel engineers and said, "Oh, we're using ZFS on the covers to do this." And we were crestfallen to find that ZFS had nothing to do with it. And in fact, what they were doing was like hard links to directories in the ugliest way possible. But ZFS send and receive would have just been such a beautiful and elegant way of implementing what they've done.
yeah,
Missed the boat on that one.
well, Chris, you did pretty much the same thing for PCBSD, right?
That's right. Yeah, with Life Preserver being able to replicate your system offsite, and then of course local snapshots, and being able to do like the time machine slider where it's like, ooh, let's see what this looked like last week. Done.
Exactly.
Looks nice. So if you had, say, unlimited free time and just wanted to add something new to ZFS, what kind of feature would be the one you'd want the most?
Yeah, so when I go to the ZFS retirement community, the thing that I've always wanted to do, and I can't convince kind of anyone to pay me to do it, is not, we have RAID Z 1, 2, and 3, but RAID Z N, and I have, larger than the margins that this notebook will contain, but I have the algorithm kind of in mind. I've got some notes jotted down. I would love to go do arbitrary parity RAID Z. Again, I don't know that there's so much of a market for it. I think even triple parity RAID is at the fringes of what people think is rational, but that's something I'd love to go do. The other thing, again, that I think is not particularly marketable, but there's some of these new devices out there that have different types of interfaces, like they handle block allocation for you, and they're putting these in front of some of the Ethernet connected drives or some of the shingled magnetic recording drives. So I'd love to do something like rip out some of the lower level, some of the SPA layer of ZFS and see if it could be plugged directly into one of these new types of devices. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. I know I'm still waiting for like a persistent L2 ARC. That's what I'd really like. So like my desktop can have large spinning disks and then one smaller SSD that survives across reboots. Would be kind of cool.
It's funny. So the L2 ARC actually came out of that earlier work at Fishworks that I mentioned, and we called it the hybrid storage pool. I'd say that the L2 ARC is still very, very interesting, but the price of DRAM has really dropped a lot since those days.
Sure.
It's become, at least in servers, much more feasible to cache a huge percentage of it. And the price of SSD has dropped to the point where a lot of desktops even, I don't know.
They have now.
Disk, right? So having that cache there. Now, that said, there are, in the same way that maybe 5 or 10 years ago, Flash sat nicely in the middle of disk and DRAM, there are a bunch of new technologies coming out from Intel and Micron and others that now sit between DRAM and Flash, and there are a couple different steps. So maybe there's going to be a resurgence of interest in the L2 ARC as the storage hierarchy gets even more complex.
Right.
Yeah, and we need to see.
There are people like me that still have 36 6-terabyte disks in a machine, and so you're not going to fit all that in RAM.
Well, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. And that, I think triple parity RAID will become more and more popular as, the fact that it takes 36 hours to resilver a 6-terabyte drive becomes, a thing.
Well, yeah, I actually wrote an article for ACMQ, or Communications to ACM, maybe 10 years ago or something now, with basically that thesis, tracking. We see that with Kreider's law, the size of disks is increasing, density of disks is increasing 2x every 2 years or whatever. But the speed, as you say, especially of spinning media, is not increasing appreciably. So the time to repopulate a disk is going from hours to days to weeks. So maybe a greater degree of parity is going to be more interesting. But at that point, are those going to be types of arrays that even large data centers have, or is that going to be kind of boutique cloud storage types of things where you have millions of disks and you're accommodating failure in different ways? And is ZFS the right answer for that? I think interesting questions. I'm looking forward to seeing what some of the answers are.
Yep. So changing topics a little bit now, could you tell us a little bit about how DTrace actually came to be and got started?
Yeah. So this is not necessarily my story. So Brian Cantrell and Mike Shapiro, they joined the Solaris kernel group in 1996 and 1997 respectively. And I think the first idea came from a discussion that Brian had with his thesis advisor, who was also my thesis advisor. We both went to the same university but didn't overlap. And I think Brian said something like, well, couldn't you just overwrite some of the kernel text and have it do something different and use that as a tracing mechanism? And the professor kind of said, well, I'm sure if that were possible, someone would have done that already. And fast forward a few years, and Brian discovered that it was both possible and no one had done that to the same degree. So there was that kernel of both how to do the instrumentation. But then Brian and Mike were doing a bunch of performance work for Solaris 8 and Solaris 9, and would run all of these diagnostics on these complex systems, and then need to correlate the data between them. And I think this spawned the notebooks upon notebooks that became the DTrace vaporware for a couple of years. This was the idea that what you need is not these static systems or these static diagnostic tools, but dynamic diagnostic tools that can collect exactly the data you need and correlate it, rather than looking at top and packet traces and I/O traces and trying to stitch them all together. So I think it had come to the point where in the kernel group, this was the legendary vaporware, where DTrace will solve all problems, DTrace knows all probes was kind of the feeling at the time. So then in 2001, actually shortly after I joined Sun, Brian kicked off the effort and Mike joined him a little while later, and with a focus on again that initial idea that Brian had about being able to dynamically instrument kernel text. I got involved with DTrace by basically I was working on a project that I was not that interested in, and I walked by Brian's office and I had this idea for how we could trace userland processes using kind of a quirk of the Spark architecture. And he kind of looked at me and said, yeah, that's great, go do it. And that's how I got involved with DTrace.
That sounds about right.
So speaking of DTrace, are there any features you feel that we're either missing out on or we need added in DTrace that you'd love to have?
Let's see. I definitely I have a laundry list of kind of internal features that I'd love to see, but I think the top line kind of user visible ones. I think first of all, DTrace had a bit of a kernel focus from its early days, and that still kind of shines through a little bit. The fact that you specify the process ID, I think it works. I mean, it works great. Don't get me wrong. Like it makes all things possible. It lets you trace code wherever it goes, trace all different parts of the system, from dynamic languages to low-level kernel facilities. But I think that if we had it to go over again, we might bring in a little bit more of that userland focus, and in particular, dynamic language focus. In about 2004, we did some work around integrating DTrace with Java. And it was great. I just think it never really evolved from there. We've used some of those same mechanisms to instrument Bash and Node.js and Python and Perl and all these other languages. But I think there's an opportunity to take the learning from those things and make support for dynamic languages in particular a lot better.
Yeah, we've seen other people we've interviewed from companies said, part of the reason they chose FreeBSD to run on was because they wanted to be able to detrace their Node.js or their Erlang and wanted ZFS and needed those type of things, and that Linux just wasn't an option.
It is heartwarming to see those technologies so broadly used. To see it was honestly a complete surprise when Apple ported DTrace to Mac OS X. But now when things are slow or I'm getting the beach ball of death, it is deeply rewarding to be able to just use DTrace to understand what's going on. It's humbling and it's great to see. It's got kind of it's not a huge community, obviously, because I think another great thing to see with DTrace would be, more Stack Overflow recipes and more Q&A and more documentation. But to see kind of the constant stream of dedicated users and followers and folks who make platform choices based on it, it's really cool to see.
So you recently wrote a blog post about the value of blogging for engineers. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so kind of rewinding a bit, in about 2002 or 2003, in the run-up to open sourcing Solaris, Sun created a very liberal blogging policy, and Brian Cantrell was a big advocate of getting the kernel team blogging. And at the time, I thought blogging was absolutely ridiculous. The thought that anyone would be click and reload on my blog, or that anyone other than my mother would go read it. And even then, when my mother reads it, she just gives me edits. It's a little embarrassing. But I started doing it, and it became this incredibly valuable tool where it was useful for me to have to write down the things I was working on, write down the things I was interested in a way that was presentable. It helped inform me for when I'm having conversations with colleagues or customers or just out in the world. So it made me much more articulate on the subjects I cared about. But then I always knew that there was ostensibly someone reading on the other side of it. But then when I go and talk to customers or talk to people in the open source community and kind of start at the beginning of the story, and they'd be able to say, well, no, I've read your blog. We can start on the last paragraph. That also was very rewarding to see that we got to skip a lot of the initial parts of the conversation and get right to the meat of it and engage with people in a completely different way. So for engineers blogging, I think it's I advise both the engineers who've been in industry for a long time, but we hire a lot of students straight out of college, a lot of engineers straight out of college. And I think for them, getting in the habit of writing down what they're doing and for becoming good at communicating what they're doing, but then also building their own kind of identity as engineers where people can research them and understand what they're working on for their careers, both at Delphix and the companies they're currently at and for their future careers. Anyway, it's a great tool across different fronts.
Yeah, and
Nice.
when solving a problem, I found even just trying to explain the problem to another engineer and talk about it a little bit often gives you your own ideas about how to fix it that you wouldn't have thought of before. And so you can get the same thing by just the way you think about it differently when you're writing it and trying to explain it to someone else.
Exactly. It's like, I'm sure we've all had these conversations where, you take someone aside and say, hey, I'm working on this thing. Can I ask you a question about it? And it turns out that there's actually no question. You could be talking to the wall, and you come to your own understanding. And I think, some of those blog posts, some of those articles I've written have definitely been of the form where I feel like I'm presenting something. But many of them are also kind of discovery, where I'm realizing something. I realize something about my subject in the process of structuring it and actually writing it and researching it. I would say, however, that every blog post I write takes about 10 to 20 times longer than I think it will.
Right.
The thing that I think will take an hour always takes a couple of days. I think that's true for a lot of engineers. Just we tend to be perfectionists. We tend to be meticulous. And then we go back and want to have all the links pointing to the right thing. It ends up taking longer. The advice I always give to my colleagues that I need to take more of is just get it written down and just hit publish. And don't worry about the 20% that actually ends up taking 50% of the time. Just get it good enough and get it out there, and people will help you edit it into place.
That's very true. So have you had any experience with or used any of the BSDs very much?
Like
I have. So I mentioned earlier that I played with NetBSD when I was in college, but I would say that basically since then, my experience has been Solaris and Mac OS 10, and I don't think anyone counts those as BSDs, despite some of their shared origins.
Mm-hmm.
But so not much in terms of current use of BSD.
Okay. So you haven't played like ZFS on FreeBSD or anything to see how it compares?
You know what? I haven't actually. So the only kind of comparison of ported technologies I've done an in-depth analysis of was Oracle's port of DTrace to their version of Linux, and I think it is now good. But when it was initially announced, it was terrible. I mean, it really deeply disappointing, in fact. But yeah, I haven't had the opportunity to kick the tires on ZFS on BSD or on Linux, but it's actually something that that we're probably going to be looking into here at Delphix in the next year or so.
Cool.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So an interesting question we've started asking people we interview: what keeps you motivated about working on open source stuff?
Yeah, man, I think that first, I just think open source is so clearly the way software is built. I think that more and more interesting components are going to be built starting in open and taken from companies that focus on proprietary software and given to open source. I think that the benefits of open source, from just getting more people working on it to having more people willing to use it. You know, I look at the success of things like Docker and just the fact that it's open source, I think, was so important for its adoption. I mean, I think you can also trace that back to Linux, where there are most of the people using those technologies are not contributing to them, and probably never even look at the source code. But the simple fact that they could, the simple fact that it's not owned by some company, and if that company goes away or gets evil, that they're beholden to them. I think that is the power of open source, and I think that. Stephen O'Grady wrote this interesting book recently called The Software Paradox. And the paradox is that there's more and more money being made in software, but the value of an individual piece of software is decreasing, or proprietary software is decreasing. So I think open source as both a community, a way of engaging with the communities, both developers and users, also as a recruiting tool for finding people who want to work for you, who want to get paid for the open source contributions they're making, but then also as a route to market, as you figure out how to build businesses around open source rather than combating open source.
Yeah, and I think the fact that they end up being open source are part of the reason that DTrace and ZFS have been so successul. Because if you only had Oracle ZFS, I don't think many people would be using it.
No, absolutely. I think if ZFS or DTrace were closed source and proprietary, they would be in some, frankly, dying operating system that fewer and fewer people cared about, as opposed to being taken and brought to these thriving communities. I think the other way to look at it is, like, let's say they were given away for free on Linux or for FreeBSD just as binary tools. I think even those would not gain acceptance. I think you need.
Sure.
I think all those would be to hasten open source work-alikes. I think folks in FreeBSD would say that closed source but free tool is great. Let's go build it in a way that's more compatible with our community.
Because I wouldn't want to build a product on the free ZFS binary that Oracle gives me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And you don't know, like, well, is this going to be supported long term?
Yeah.
What
this
all
is
the implications
randomly
of
go
that.
away or something. Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Well, do you have anything you do outside of your busy life with open source and being CTO? Any hobbies?
Well, you know what? I used to play quite a bit of competitive ultimate frisbee at the national level, but for the last couple of years, that's been relegated to kind of pickup activities and practice activities, but still play quite a bit of ultimate frisbee. I also coach my son's little league team, his baseball team, and that takes up a surprising amount of time. I think it's if you play fantasy sports, I think a coach of even a 9-year-old's little league team, you can kind of descend into the same kind of madness as you organize their rosters and stuff like that. But those are kind of the big draws of my time outside of the work commitments and open source commitments.
Oh, nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to add before we let you go?
Nope. Thanks very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, we appreciate it. Always love talking some good ZFS, DTrace, and just Unix in general.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you so much, Adam. We appreciate it. Okay, it's time to get to our Beastie Bits section, but before we do that, we do have another sponsor to bring you this week, which of course is going to be DigitalOcean, and the website for that, digitalocean.com. It's pretty much as simple as it sounds, and you can go there, create a free account, and then put a few bucks in it, and don't forget when you're doing that, or if you already have an account, go grab that coupon code FreeBSDNow and apply that to your account, and that'll give you a $10 credit, which is good for running VMs. So of course you'll want to run some sort of BSD in there. FreeBSD is available by default, but if you want to hack it up a little bit, you can throw open in there too and get that running in one of their droplets. So yeah, it's really cool. But DigitalOcean makes that simple. They got data centers all over the world, including a new one in Toronto.
Yeah, so they have San Francisco, Toronto, New York, London, Amsterdam, Germany, and Singapore.
Singapore, yeah. That's right. That's right. So they make it easy if you need something close because you need good connectivity to it. You can do that. Or if you need something far away because maybe you're backing something up somewhere on the other side of the world and you want to have redundancy there. That's really cool. You can do that with DigitalOcean. And of course, you can do it programmatically. They have an API. So if you'd like to spin up and tear down VMs, you can do that at will and script that any way you want. So go ahead and do that for sure. And if you do end up talking to the DigitalOcean guys, let them know that you heard about it here on BSD Now and Jupiter Broadcasting.
Yeah, and a terabyte a month of bandwidth with the $5 one. It's like
ridiculous. I know, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
It's gotten cheap these days, but yeah, there's no reason not to have one.
Okay. Lightning round.
Our lightning round of Beastie Bits, and we premiered that last week, but basically we're just going to rapid fire some things at you, and we want to pass it along, maybe not newsworthy in and of itself, or we're going to do 10 minutes on it, but you need to know about it. Maybe this is something important to you. So what do we have first here? We have isboot.
Yes, so isboot
boot driver.
Yeah, is a way to basically boot from iSCSI. Currently it uses the older iSCSI client, but it works. So basically, this allows you to do diskless boot, kind of like NFS, except without having to use NFS. So this is basically a kernel module that takes over. So if you have a network card that supports booting from iSCSI, it'll provide the early parts and load the kernel, and then the kernel loads this driver and is able to mount the root file system over iSCSI and deal with that during the single user mode until you can switch to the regular iSCSI mount, and basically allows you to run machines off of a remote ZVol or other iSCSI target.
Neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely neat. I'd like to do that.
Yeah, and they just pushed a new version that works with FreeBSD 10.2, and that's looking quite interesting.
So we need to get that imported either as a port or something.
So it's available. There, somebody did create a port. So there's a port of it now so that you can get that. And then, we're looking at what it would take to switch it over to using the new iSCSI client that's built in. Because currently this one relies on the iSCSI client in ports, I think. And so, but yeah, we'd be looking at converting this to using the new iSCSI client that's built into the kernel, and then be able to commit this into the kernel, and then just having that as another boot option would be really cool.
I'd love to have this done out of box because I've envisioned doing this system on my setup here where I have one server and a bunch of iSCSI booted desktops, and I do boot environments and ZFS and all that from the server. It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, and then we'll have to see if we can extend my encrypted boot block thing to it.
Yes.
Probably not, because part of it ends up running. I'm not sure how the part that the BIOS and the network card do before you get to FreeBSD work, but it might actually be possible. I don't know.
Hey, well, let's make that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, well, next up, you've heard us talk about Tame in the past. Well, I guess Tame is no more. It looks like it's Pledge now, so it has been renamed. So this is, of course, OpenBSD's new system for doing development and restricting what your application can and can't do. And we have a link here to, it looks like Theo wrote this.
Yep, just a post explaining it. And also asking, because they've started implementing this in all over the OpenBSD tree, asking people to run the snapshots, look in their D-message, find any errors, see if anybody's already reported that error, and if not, report it to the mailing list. So the way the Now Pledge API works is basically you call that with a string as the parameter that is a space-separated list of the calls that you want your program to be allowed to do. And if it tries to do anything else, it will crash and spit out, hey, I tried to do X when I'm not allowed.
Okay.
It's quite an interesting way to do it.
Definitely. Okay, next up we have an interview with a NetBSD developer, Leonardo Takari. And it looks like this is over on a Polish site here, but it's a nice interview here, and they talk a little bit about the new NetBSD 7.0, some of the new features there, and some of the areas he works on specifically. But he says he maintains a lot of stuff in package source, and he uses NetBSD as a desktop system as well. But a good number of questions here. There's a Polish version and the English translation. So if you'd like to read that as well, there's looks like 8 questions. So go ahead and spend a little time doing that to get caught up what's going on in NetBSD land. Okay, now this one here is kind of neat. We have a new live CD called Fugu Ita based on OpenBSD 5.8. And it looks like, let's see, it comes out of Japan here, but it's basically just an OpenBSD live system. And they include a whole bunch of different tools on it. Because it is Japanese based, it also has some Japanese specific tools such as KTerm for terminal emulator, Japanese file pager, character converters, fonts, etc.
Yep.
But if you're looking for a neat little live CD, this is pretty cool.
It's a great way to try OpenBSD without having to install it.
That's right. So for those who don't know, Fuguita stands for blowfish disk in Japanese, because Fugu being the blowfish. So There you go. Okay, well, next up here, what do we have? It looks like something from NetBSD DTrace Toolkit got an update and was imported.
Yeah, so this is Christos, who we interviewed about Blacklisty a couple of months ago. But he committed imports the DTrace Toolkit from FreeBSD, which is a bunch of simple scripts such as DTrust and so on. Most of them work unmodified on NetBSD. A couple others he had to add missing probes or adjust, tweak things, but they're now all available in the NetBSD source tree, although they're not connected to the build, so they don't get built automatically, but they're all there when you need to use them. But most of them don't really need compiling or anything. They just don't get installed by default. So you just have to go and dig into this directory and grab them, and then you can start detracing your NetBSD.
Okay. Well, lastly, we have a little bit older article here that I don't think we brought before or mentioned, but it's a neat article that shows you how to set up failover and load balancing in pfSense, and it's pretty well complete with including pictures, so you can see where in the interface to go click things and turn stuff on and how to do that. But definitely want to take a look at that if you've ever wanted to try setting that up on your pfSense box.
Yeah, especially, in this case, they're talking about having 2 different internet connections and balancing between them.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful. So definitely give that a whirl. It's a couple months old now, but definitely worth checking out.
Yep.
I wonder if that'll change though for the new pFSense UI. I would imagine.
It looks like most of their setup was done early on, like in the text part before you even get to the web interface.
Okay.
But so cool. The screenshots probably won't match up, but most of the configuration will probably stay
Hopefully
similar.
It's close enough. You can figure it out even if you want to try the new alpha. Okay, it's time for feedback and questions, but before we get to that, of course, we're going to mention the last sponsor this week, which is going to be Tarsnap, and of course, the website for that is pretty obvious, guys, but tarsnap.com, where you want to go get set up. Just go ahead and make your account, put a few bucks in there, and you'll be surprised how long you can stretch that few dollars out, because backups are just so darn dirt cheap, and with the client and the way encryption works and everything, you can trust that what's happening on the remote side is kosher. They don't have access to your data, which is very important. Colin cannot be forced to turn it over to anybody, no matter how many of his fingers they break.
Literally doesn't have access to your key. Only you do.
He does not know what it is. Which, consequence of that is make sure you back up that key. Just public service announcement here. If you're using Tarsnap already, do back up that key somewhere.
Yep.
Even print it out. I appreciate that it was printable. So you could actually put a hard copy somewhere if you needed to.
Because you kind of need to.
Yeah, worst comes to worst, you could type that sucker out, but at least you have access to your data. So definitely do that if you haven't done it already.
If the most arduous part of your restore is typing out the key off a piece of paper, you'll be very thankful.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. In the case where the whole office burns down or the house or something, right?
Yep.
So, anyway, yeah, go ahead and get set up with TarSnap, guys. It makes it easy to do all that tar-like interface. So, if you're already familiar with how to use the tar command, it's going to be a piece of cake. They have clients for everything, including Windows with Sigwin.
Yeah.
So, go
And,
figure. You can even do it there.
There's some interesting clients as well, including Stripe.com, which is a giant credit card processing company that we happen to use that scale engine. And knowing that our data there is actually backed up with TarSnap instead of something that's not as secure makes me feel better about that decision.
That's right. That's right. So, again, guys, if you talk to them over at TarSnap, let them know you heard about it here on BSD Now. Okay, first up, we have Michael writes in. And this is actually really helpful, Michael. Thank you for sending this in. But he sent us a list of all the EuroBSDCon videos where they're separated out now.
Yes, so he has links to the YouTube videos that we gave you last week, except or 2 weeks ago, I guess. But he has the timestamps included, so you can jump to specific. So if you want to watch any one of those specific talks, you can jump right to the right spot.
Oh man, yeah. So he's got them organized by room and by day, and yeah, you can just click the link and it'll shoot you ahead to the right timestamp, and you're good to go. So again, I know that was probably a fair amount of work, Michael. So thank you so much for sending that in. I know that'll make it a lot easier for people to watch the videos they want to see.
I highly recommend the Patrick Folstrom one from the closing keynote. It was really good. Although the opening keynote was also very good, and there were lots of other really good ones too. In fact.
Cool. Okay, well, next up, a frequent Posniffer writes in about a link on Unix history. And no, I hadn't seen this, but he's got a link to, it looks like Google Plus here.
Yeah, it's an interview with Professor Kernighan, who is the K in K and R, the two people that wrote C. And it's an interview about C and how it's evolved over the years and how it got started and all that. So I'm definitely going to sit down and watch this later.
Yeah, that definitely looks neat. So, yeah, if you haven't watched that one, there's another great video you can watch this weekend or listen to on your podcast on the way into the office.
Nah,
or maybe on the way home if you're listening to us on the way in, right?
Kernighan is also the K in awk as well. I didn't know that.
In fact, we also owe the name Unix to him as well. So how cool is that?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, go check that out. Looks like a neat video. Okay, last up, we have Erno writes in here, which, Anyway, let's see. He says, hi, Allan and Chris. I enjoy listening to your show, despite the fact that my main drivers are Linux machines. Every time I hear your show, I want to go install FreeBSD on a machine. Well, great. I'm glad to hear that. He said, I do, in fact, have a Dell tower in my basement that runs PCBSD right now, but I'd like to turn it into a FreeNAS server. But before I do, I need to solve a technical issue. This is what I have, a DigitalOcean droplet that hosts my own cloud installation and runs OpenVPN. I have an internet connection that is behind a corporation/school firewall. This is what I want. I want to be able to connect to my DigitalOcean droplet hosted under his site here from anywhere in the world. I want my FreeNAS to be connected to DigitalOcean all the time through OpenVPN or SSH. And I want my site and the FreeNAS somehow bridged together so that my storage limitations can go from 20 gigabytes to 1 to 2 terabytes. Interesting. So is there a way to bridge the DigitalOcean droplet to my home FreeNAS so that the huge storage is always available inside and outside of my corporate and school network? Thank you for considering my question. Well, there's probably a bunch of different ways to do this, Allan. What would be the easiest?
I'm guessing you would want to set the droplet up as a PF or a OpenVPN in bridge mode, so that broadcast will get passed and so on, and then. Yeah, you would connect to it from the FreeNAS. So I'm not sure how you do that on a FreeNAS per se. If it was vanilla FreeBSD, you would just set up the client and do it. But on a FreeNAS, I'm not entirely sure how you would do OpenVPN. But that's more of a FreeNAS specific question. The forums might be able to help you. But you would basically have the FreeNAS connect to the DigitalOcean droplet with the VPN, and then your client machine could also connect. And then once the FreeNAS is connected to the DigitalOcean droplet, you have your choice of ways to share the files. You can just do NFS. Although, you're going over the internet, it's not going to be great, but...
Not optimal, but...
It's like, that or SSHFS or something like that. But you can definitely then start using the storage of the FreeNAS from the droplet. And then, once you connect your client to the DigitalOcean droplet, then you'll be able to access the files on the FreeNAS basically over that virtual local LAN that you've created by connecting all those.
Nice. Okay. Well, cool. Let us know how you end up doing that. Actually, and, that'd be a good follow-up to hear about.
If you're not running a web server or something that's going to take the port, running the OpenVPN on like port 443 or something that's going to be allowed through that firewalls that you're behind will solve most of your problems. Although it does look like he wants to run a website on it, so then you have to use some other port. So it's just poking around until you find something that's allowed out of your corporate/school firewall.
Okay. Well, cool. Again, yeah, write us back. Be curious to hear how that works and how you get it set up. Okay, well, that wraps up the show for the week, folks. Of course, we'll be back same time next week, but we'll be here live with Allan will be back. So we'll be looking forward to hearing how and give us your recap. I assume all the usual suspects will be there, some of the main ZFS developers.
Yep. And also Jeff Bonwick, the original creator of ZFS, will be there giving a talk about the history of ZFS.
Nice.
Kirk McCusick will be there giving a talk. Lots of other interesting stuff going on there. The schedule is like, I'm glad they only have the one track because I want to see every one of the things. Sure. There's a lot of interesting talks from companies doing stuff on ZFS, but also from companies that build the hardware and stuff. So, there's Open ZFS success stories, kind of lightning talk thing. That'll be cool. Then there's a ZFS internals overview by Kirk. Then there's send and receive stuff by the person working on that. Then the compressed send and receive presentation. Then the people from OVH, which is a very large hosting company, are talking about live migration with zMotion and using ZFS with that.
Okay, that's neat.
Jeff Bonwick talking about the birth of ZFS. Then there's Intel talking about parity declustered RAID Z in mirrors, which is interesting. Want to find out what's that about. Then there's people from Delphix also talking about improving performance on AWS. And then George Wilson will be talking about the compressed ARC, getting twice as much ARC out of your machine by compressing the bits that stay in RAM.
That's cool.
Then OS Nexus will be talking about discontiguous caching. And then Nexenta will be talking about persistent L2 ARC. I know you were interested in that.
Yes, please.
Also a dedupe ceiling. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but it might mean dedupe is now usable by people. You can basically set maybe a RAM limit or something, and it could be interesting. And it's talking about write back cache, sandboxing OpenZFS on Linux. I don't know if that'll be very useful, but ZTour and also SPA metadata allocation classes, which is another interesting one from Intel. And then closing, and then we'll have the casual dinner thing, and then the second day we will have a hackathon with awards and so on.
Okay. Well, great. Sounds like you guys are going to have a fantastic time. Well, hopefully, are they going to be recorded as far as you know?
I know they've tried in the past, so maybe.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Well, maybe. We'll hopefully be bringing you guys those videos here shortly then, because those sound neat to see. I'd like to see a couple of those myself. Okay, well, as we close up, of course, guys, same place as usual, feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's where you want to send your stuff in. So while Allan's gone next week, if there's a story you want to make sure we get mentioned in the future, go ahead and try and send that in. If you know somebody who needs to be interviewed for the show and you want to name drop and be like, this person needs to be on the show, please let us know.
Yes, and also you might want to email them and give them the extra poke, because often when we contact people, they're like, no, nobody wants to hear what I have to say, and it's like, yes, they do. Yeah,
it's actually really interesting. So send us those notifications if you've contacted somebody and you want to try and arrange it or whatever. Let us know. We'll be happy to put them on a future episode of BSD Now. And of course, the show ideas, topics, and your questions. So if you're having a technical issue or whatever, send it in. We'll try and answer that the best we can. So anyway, thank you guys so much for being with us this week on the show. We will talk to you next time.
See you.